ratings going in the tank. This week's issue on Park Ridge sports history. Hi everyone, this is Will O'Toole. I'd like to thank you for allowing me into your homes. And we're going to be talking all things sports, obviously, but today I'd like to focus on the World Series, or really lack thereof. But before I begin that, let me just say this. The World Series, well, find it, first of all. The World Series has been a disaster, not just this year, but for the last 20, 25 years. And we're going to go into that in a second. I think baseball has a huge problem with the World Series. They may be growing an audience of, or they may be growing revenue, but they are certainly not growing an audience that's going to continue the traditions and the followings and the fandom that baseball needs. You know, when I was a kid, I basically was introduced in the late 60s to the game. And by about 1970, I was watching every baseball game. I remember watching from 71 on, probably every pitch of every inning of every game that was played. I was a huge baseball fan. And yes, I'm coming from a time when maybe we didn't have all the other options that we do today for the kids. However, I was a product of, quote unquote, the TV generation. And if I wasn't watching the game on TV, and we were very lucky here in the Northeast to have both the Yankees and the Mets continuously broadcast 150 games a year that you could watch on television. But if I wasn't watching the games, I was playing it. And I know this may sound anecdotal, but I don't really think it is. You don't see a lot of kids playing the game today. And worse, they're not interested in the game. I do have some research on this, and it's provided by Baseball Almanac and Baseball Reference, and it's not really hard to get the information. All you have to do is basically plug in the right words. But I was interested in seeing where the baseball ratings are for the last 5-6 years in relation to all time. And I never thought that I was going to be as surprised as I've seen. I know baseball has a problem, but I don't think baseball realizes it. I know the commissioner doesn't, and I know the lords of baseball don't. Baseball is bleeding fans. How do I know that? Well, let's talk about this. Every game is now played at night. Every game starts prime time. And yet every World Series played in the 21st century still does not have the ratings that the 1970 World Series has. I picked on 70 for two reasons. One is it was the last World Series to be all matinee. Every one of the games was played at 2 o'clock, 2:30 in the afternoon, even the weekend games. And of course, I'm using that because there was the Cincinnati Reds, a small market team. Actually, it's the National League's smallest team, smallest market team, even though Louisville's basically right across the river. But it's the smallest market team in baseball. And you had the Baltimore Orioles. Now, the Orioles had some great players on the team. So did the Reds. But the Orioles never basically grew out of the region. They never grew a national audience. It's kind of weird. I'm using the 70 because that series did a 19.4 rating. And the interesting thing is now it's the World Series TV ratings that I'm using only goes back to 1968. All right. But you have to remember as well that baseball wasn't really being broadcast on TV with the same zest. Probably in the 50s. I can't really say for sure whether all the games were broadcast. I'd have to do a little research on that. And the ratings weren't maybe as scientific or as detailed. Just starting, but that 70 series was the lowest rated series in about, until you get to 1989. That was the lowest. And here's why I'm saying that. That Reds Orioles series drew 19.4. The year before, the Mets 22.4. The year after, the 71 Orioles against the Pirates 24.2. I just gave you a couple of reasons why the Orioles and the Reds did not generate, let's say, higher ratings. Two things. One is the Miracle Mets at 69 had a major market in the New York Mets. Plus, they had a great story going from the worst team probably of all time, the 40-win disaster team of 1962 of Casey Stengel's era with the Mets, to a team that fashioned 100 wins, overtook the Cubs late in the year, were led by a young, charismatic pitcher, future Hall of Famer, Sports Illustrated's Man of the Year, and that was Tom Seaver, plus a great, classy former Brooklyn Dodger, Gil Hodges. They were a great story, plus they had New York and the whole metropolitan area following, and, of course, being the major market, boom, it's promoted. And they did play the Orioles, a team that really doesn't get the credit really that should be due them. Weaver, of course, I'm being prejudiced when I say it's one of my favorite managers, if not my favorite manager of all time. If you read some of his books and stuff, you'll really get, he gives you a real good understanding of the real pressures and responsibilities of a manager. But that 69 series, yeah, it generated a 22.4. And it also, like the Red Series, went 5 games. And it did, 3 points better than the Red Series because of the Mets. The 71 series had the Pirates again and the Orioles being in there. But that one went 7, and that drew 24.2. It also probably benefited from this, being the first World Series to have a night game. And I remember that. It was a big deal to have that. But they still played the weekend games at about 2:30 in the afternoon. In fact, Game 7 was played at, let's say, 2 o'clock. I think it was done by 4:30, that Game 7 series finale. The 2-1 Pirate win that gives them their first championship since 1960. And, of course, the MVP in that series, Roberto Clemente, hits a home run to give the Pirates an early 1-0 lead. But being Roberto, unbelievable. It was his stage. I think that he helped carry that series in many respects and brought it up from, the 19.4 rating and brought it up 5 additional points. The Game 7 plus Roberto. That 70 series, nothing against the Reds and the Orioles. It only went 5, and that always hurts baseball. But they had a number of future Hall of Famers on both teams. You had Palmer and the 2 Robinsons. Brooks, of course, the MVP of that series, put on a defensive display that was unbelievable. Plus, he hit like crazy in that series, a couple home runs, and he just ruined the Reds. And, of course, Frank Robinson returning to Cincinnati after being dealt by them to the Orioles in the prior to the 66 season. And, of course, the Reds had both future Hall of Famers Tony Perez and Johnny Bench, plus, of course, Pete Rose. And, of course, Johnny Bench was, in many respects, kind of like Tom Seaver was for the Mets, that he really is the face of that Reds franchise during the 70s. Actually, more so than Rose, you could argue, because Rose doesn't stay with them. Anyway, you could see that maybe the Reds are, the inexperience costs them, but they would be back. And they would basically be the National League team of the 70s. And in many respects, probably get far more credit or being seen as the team of the 70s rather than the Oakland A's. That's another story for another day, and we can have some fun with that. But that 70 series at 19.4 is still higher rated than any World Series in the 21st century. And think about some of the series that we've had in the 21st century. We've had a number of teams win the World Series for their franchise for the first time. The Angels, the Giants, technically out in San Francisco, not 1, not 2, but 3 World Series in San Francisco. First time that San Francisco enjoys winning a World Series. You have the Red Sox finally ending the curse of the Bambino in 2004 after a dramatic come from behind, down 3-0 to the Yankees and beating their rival. And they still could not top the Reds of 1970. Their share was 15.8. Now, admittedly, it was a 4-game sweep. I get it. But the Red Sox were a story. And the funny thing is, they not only best the Yankees and destroy that rival in a real revenge type of thing for all the years going back to Babe Ruth, but then they beat the Cardinals, who had bested them in the 46 series in 7 games, and again, the Impossible Dream Team with Carl Yaz in 67. Ruined them in both. And of course, the 46 series is the only series that Ted Williams ever played in. So even that should have been a little bit of juice for the series. And yet that series played at prime time still couldn't defeat the 70 series between the Reds and the Orioles. In fact, I'm going to tell you something, and I really mean this, I really think this all goes back to Commissioner Bud Selig taking the reins from Fay Vincent, first being the acting commissioner of baseball, and then being the full-time commissioner. Under him, baseball experienced the first World Series that wasn't played in 90 years in 1994. And I think he has to have some of the blame for that 94 player strike. And then he introduced interleague play. Why? Because he decides to bring his Brewers into the National League. First of all, they're 2 different franchises. He felt that he always felt that Milwaukee belongs back in the National League. Well, that was the Braves. They're in Atlanta. These are the Brewers, who rose like a phoenix from the ashes of the Seattle Pilots. So they're an American League team. Okay, enough of that argument. We don't have to talk so much about that. But he moves the Brewers. But yet, he had the expansion. Colorado, Florida, Tampa Bay. All right, and Arizona. Adds basically 2 teams to the leagues and really makes it 16-14, or now it's 15-15. So he forces interleague play. And he thought it was going to be just a great thing. That rivalries, the White Sox and the Cubs, and the Yankees and the Mets would really, really improve. Well, give him credit. Maybe the first, I'll even say about 5 years of interleague play added some juice to the game. At least here, the Yankees and the Mets staged some really classic interleague games. I will give you that. But now they're blasé. And I can actually see this. Baseball just blowing up the entire National League and the American League and just cobbling together divisions based on region, where you have the Mets, the Yankees, and the Red Sox together, maybe with the Phillies in the future. And then maybe the Washington Nationals. So that would be an Eastern team. And then moving on. So just evenly distribute the American and National League teams and then go from there. And they're really ruining some of the important facets of, 1, the World Series, 2, the All-Star game, which that's blown up too. And just the allure of the World Series. When we were kids, all right, the World Series presented 2 teams that never met. Yeah, okay. You want to nickel dime me and say, well, sometimes they met in springtime. Nobody cared about that. But these are 2 teams that never matched each other during the regular season. Now you got teams that have seen each other maybe a dozen times. So there's not that mystique going into the game. And really, by broadcasting the games every night at 8:08 or 8:07, even the weekend games, you are ruining the game, because at some point the audiences leave you. It's one thing for an audience Like in LA, it's still 5 o'clock when we start first pitch. 8:08, it's 5:08 in LA. But they are coming into the game as opposed to leaving the game because of time. And I think so often it's more fun coming into the game. How do I know that? Well, think about it. When you were a school kid and the games were played at 2 o'clock in the afternoon and you were getting home at 3:30, how many of you out there used to sneak a portable radio and listen to the game because it was kind of cool, and then race home and watch the baseball being played, and it was over in time for you to go out and play a little ball before dinner? Today, these games are interminable. They last so long. Perfect example, last night's game, which the pundits are deeming a classic. First of all, I didn't think it was a classic. And I saw an arguably, okay, maybe I shouldn't be a judge on that because I didn't see the whole game. I saw much of it as highlights, but I couldn't stay with the game. I saw the first few innings and LA was ahead. I could not watch it. It is just, it's like watching a soap opera between pitches, let alone innings. They have to do something about it. And you know, the launch angle has replaced a great defensive play. Take a look. Now, last night, there weren't as many strikeouts, but I'm going to give you a perfect example. In 1993, in a classic, and it was a fun game because it was so unusual, when the Phillies were bested by the Blue Jays 15-14. That game was 9 innings. There were 29 runs scored, 32 hits. And get this, there was only a total of 12 strikeouts in the 13 strikeouts in the game. All right. So there was plenty of action. Put it this way. They had doubles. They had triples. Ricky Henderson had a triple. Even Al Leiter, because they didn't have the DH fully, had a double in that game. Devon White had a double and a triple. He had a really good game there. Home run by Lenny Dykstra. He had 2 of them in that game, plus a double. And then there was another triple by Milt Thompson. Name for me the last time you saw a World Series with that many extra base hits and those few strikeouts. And you could even live with the number of strikeouts in that game because you're seeing so much action. I mean, Dykstra went 4 for 5 in that particular game, had 4 runs scored, and had he went 3 for 5. He had 4 RBIs and 4 runs scored. He had a tremendous series. It was a great game. I think, have somewhere in like a baseball encyclopedia, I still have the paper from the next day that recounted that whole box score and the story the night before. And why I'm saying that paper came to me at 6 o'clock in the morning. So it was over before deadline on that night. Today, last night's game, yes, 8-7. Last night's game took over 4 hours as well. And it was ending after midnight on a Saturday night. Now, look, I'm willing to work with it this way. I understand that baseball, they want to show the games in prime time. The 75 World Series between the Red Sox and the Reds, I think what made that World Series into such a classic was that those games that were played during the week were riveting. All right, Game 6. How many people were saying, wow, the game ended after midnight and I had to wake up for the next day? And that game went 12 innings and it was a classic 7-6 game. But it was like, wow, exciting game. The next game was a classic also. Kind of is, in a way, it's overshadowed by Game 6. But that Game 7 was won in the top of the 9th with 2 out by Joe Morgan, scoring, of course, Pete Rose. But even that game was over before midnight. Today's game, you might as well just say this. First inning is going to take 45 minutes. And if you can find a couple of innings where they take less than 15 minutes, consider yourself lucky. I really don't believe fans want to sit there for 4 hours. I think fans want to sit there and be entertained. I don't think fans really want to watch strikeouts. And I don't think necessarily home runs are really gripping or keeping the fans' attention. They've lost a little luster. Our home run hitters, when you have 8 guys in the lineup all averaging 20 to 25 home runs kind of lose their luster. And the problem is today that maybe you have a Mookie Betts who is a legitimate 5-tool player, and you might have a Bellinger on the Dodgers who might be a 5-tool player, but he's slowly going to become, I think, with this just a force towards home runs. He's going to watch his average dip, and they just won't be the classic all-star player. We're turning many of our players into Dave Kingmans, except that Kingman never drew too many walks. Struck out a ton, and would hit a ton of home runs. But many of those home runs weren't even that important. I know, I feel like I'm griping. But baseball has a real problem because even though the owners may be growing the revenue and players may be making more money than ever, great for them. But guys, you owe it to the game to grow it. And our kids are not paying attention to the greatest game ever invented. Remember, it's the first sport God ever invented. It's Genesis 1, chapter 1. It says, in the big inning, God made, etc. In the big inning. Get it? It's the greatest game going. It's pure Americana, and we're losing it all for the sake of earning a few extra dollars. And really what they should be growing is not just the dollars, and everybody has a right to make the money, but you also have a responsibility to grow the game of baseball so that future generations can enjoy what we've enjoyed. Watching Willie Mays, watching Ted Williams, watching Yastrzemski in his Triple Crown season of 67, watching really Johnny Bench evolve the position of catcher. I know I'm right. Watching the great pitchers of our time. I mean, I spent a whole show talking about the pitchers, the Whitey Fords, the Tom Seavers, the Bob Gibsons. These were the guys who were really, when you think about it, when you thought about all the great teams of the time, you always went to that ace on the staff. They were the QB, so to speak, of the baseball team. And every great team had an ace. Catfish Hunter, Sandy Koufax. They were lucky. They had Don Drysdale as well. Orioles had Jim Palmer. All the great teams, well, maybe with the exception of the Reds, but they had a decent staff. But Whitey Ford, I mean, just Steve Carlton. Every team had a great staff, and they could go the distance. Baseball today, yes, I'll give you this. It's more scientific. It's more there's more data involved. The players are probably in better shape. I get all that. They are probably better athletes. But, being a better athlete, though, doesn't necessarily equate into being a better baseball player. Because baseball demands also not just the physical, it also involves the mental. And I think, I'll give you a perfect example. Last night, that young, and he seems like an exciting player. I haven't seen him totally. So Randy Arozarena, who is now, didn't realize this. I went to Baseball Reference. He's 25 years old. Okay. Kind of, you could consider this maybe his breakout season, but basically, last night he scores the winning run. Yes, he's got great speed, but he stumbled around third, and he should have been dead to rights at home. But the catcher, and I'm not blaming the catcher per se, but he was trying to do a swipe tag, obviously thinking that the player was closer to home, and he missed the ball. But even on that play, the cutoff, the ball was in the ground. It wasn't even a perfect relay throw by Muncy. They're killing the catcher on that. But that was a play where really 3 mistakes turned into a win for Tampa Bay. The 75 World Series was incredible because there were great defensive plays in that game. Yeah, there were a couple of umpire decisions that went the wrong way. You could argue for the Red Sox. But there was there was just outstanding plays. That's what made that Game 6 so unbelievable, that 75 World Series. And just getting back to it, here's the thing. Since Bud Selig took over from 1998, there has not been a World Series that has drawn a 20 rating. You got to go back to 1992 with the Toronto Blue Jays before you get that. And that was the last time that baseball had a 20 rating. I mean, this is deplorable. And you're talking about teams like the Red Sox ending their curse. St. Louis, not just a Missouri team. And I would argue they're no longer a regional team. They're a national team. The Cubs in 2016, do you realize that the Cubs-Cleveland series, which was exciting, drew only a 12.9 TV rating. The Reds' 5-game series with the Orioles was at a 19. 60%, almost 60% higher than that. And that was a 7-game series. And that was 2 teams both trying to end a curse. And the Cubs are not just, they're not just a Illinois team. They're not just a region. They are a certifiable national team along with the Red Sox, another national team. Like I was saying, you can go anywhere in the United States, whether it's Florida or California or Arizona, and you're going to find a plethora of Red Sox fans. You're going to find a multitude of Cub fans, and of course, Yankee fans. The Yankees were in the World Series. Ready for this? They were in the World Series in 2000, 2001. That 2001 drew only a 15.7 rating. And that 2001 came after the Twin Towers were destroyed. And America was looking for some heroes. And that series was an exciting one. Remember, the Yankees fall down 2-0 and then win the 3 games in the Bronx in dramatic fashion, with Jeter hitting a big opposite field home run to become christened Mr. November, because the game was played or goes into November 1st. And then the 7th game, there was the blowout in Game 6, but that provided almost that Game 6, the blowout with Andy Pettitte on the mound, provided an unbelievable story, a 7th game. And you're thinking, wow, did they waste too many runs, Arizona, in Game 7? And that came down to Arizona on a broken bat. Well, I shouldn't say broken bat, but a fisted bloop single by Luis Gonzalez off Mariano Rivera, a Hall of Famer, the first 100% inductee into the Hall of Fame, coming down to a bloop single to score the winning run in the bottom of the 9th to give Arizona. And yet that series drew only a 15.7. And I think one of the reasons why it was played on a late Sunday, started at 8 o'clock. Now, I'm all for baseball starting, as I said, the primetime games, but 8 o'clock, especially when they're lasting on average 4 hours, you're going into the next day. How about you start the Saturday games at about 4 o'clock? There's got to be a window there that would make it fun. Start at 4 o'clock. And you know what? If it's on the East Coast and you're worried about shadows, the heck with it. Everyone has to deal with the shadows. Remember what Yogi Berra said? It gets late early out there. And he was talking about the shadows of late September and early October in the World Series and how it affects. Okay? That's part of the game, the environment, being out in the sunshine, all the rest of it. Baseball has to grow the business. It has an obligation, or else it's going to go the way of Norman Rockwell paintings on the cover of the Saturday Evening Post. It's going to disappear. And baseball is going to be nostalgia instead of something that grips us for 100 and some odd games a year, 180 games a year, culminating with the Fall Classic, where it harvests all of the great games and all the great all-time players can say they played in the Fall Classic. It's a shame that baseball just doesn't get it. All right. I've had my rant. What I would like to do, though, is this. Since we are talking all things baseball, years ago, there was, back in the 70s, and it started about 1970. I always thought it was Topps, but I figured I would show you just a couple before I run here. If you collected baseball cards like I did, and I did it for a number of years, about 4 or 5, I was very intense collecting. And actually, I got back into collecting, but it wasn't the same. I was collecting as an investment instead of for fun. But baseball had these World Series cards, and I always thought that Topps produced them. And of course, doing the research, well, I was wrong. If you can recall, they had these Fleer baseball cards, and the reason I'm bringing them up, and I'm sure, hopefully some of you have seen this, but this was a cartoonist by the name of Robert Laughlin. He's from Connecticut. And what he had done, and I'm getting this courtesy of Sports Collectors Daily, but what he did was draw or cartoon a number of, he did all the World Series up until, and I remember collecting it up until 1969, the cards. But he did every World Series, and he would do a cartoon. Some of them humorous, and some of them like this, kind of serious. And this one, of course, the 1954 one, waged between the Giants when they were in New York and the Cleveland Indians. And of course, Cleveland had the all-time record, which has since been bested, with 111 wins in the season. It's amazing. That year, they only won the division by 8 games. They beat the Yankees, who, unfortunately, won 103. How many times do you win 103 games and don't even qualify for the postseason? That's another problem with this year. How many of these underrated or under 500 teams actually made this glorified? They should have just included everybody in the playoffs and just made it into a March Madness. All right, I'm done. Anyway, these are the cartoons. Here's the 71. Now, what he did was he continued with the series, and in some, he updated this. But this is Roberto Clemente, a little bit more serious than this one with the Mets and the Orioles. This is a little more serious. You can see that he has a nice little caricature of Roberto Clemente. And of course, Roberto, he played in the 60 series, hitting all 7 games in the 60 series over the Yankees. And then in the 71 series, got hits in all 7 games. He's one of 2 players that that got a hit in every World Series game he ever played. 14 games. That's amazing in a gap of 11 years. So Roberto Clemente did that. But anyway, the cartoonist was Robert Laughlin. And I'm just going to read what I saw. He was a Connecticut-based cartoonist. He had produced this set basically in black and white and tried to market it privately. Fleer, though, commissioned him to produce the set in color for its 70 release. And for the most part, he used the same artwork that he had created several years later. I know for a fact that this 69 Mets one is not the 70 edition. This is a later year. This is like 71 or 72, because I do remember it, and I apologize. I couldn't find the 71 for the 69 series. But they were great little things. I always got a kick out of them because, you know what? I thought that Topps did it and that they were an inclusion in the collection that you would get when you went down to the candy store and got your little individual packs with the chewing gum that was always stale but always smelled so good. And no matter how stale it was, man, you just loved the taste of it and the feel in your hands. And I used to love the smell of the baseball cards, particularly of the one that was directly underneath that strip of bubble gum. Just had a great aroma. You smell that, and immediately it connotes in your mind summer, wiffle ball, hanging out with your friends, playing ball with your brothers, watching the games on TV. It's just a wonder, and the freedom of being summer where you could play from morning until evening, and your mom and dad were like, "Hey, it's 8 o'clock. Yeah, you can continue playing." Oh, but you know what? You want some ice cream, and maybe you would break for the night to have some ice cream, or listen to the ball game on the radio and sit outside on the patio and just look up at the stars and listen to a Met broadcast or a Yankee broadcast, because we were lucky then. I'll tell you that we had 6 very good play-by-play announcers. For the Yankees, of course, it was the Scooter Rizzuto, who was funny, probably because, like me, constantly makes a lot of mistakes, but they're funny, and they're so for the most part, he's got great stories. Scooter, he's just funny. Then you had Frank Messer, who was probably the real professional sports announcer for the Yankees. Very good. In fact, when he went to the White Sox, every once in a while they would go in, let's say ESPN, and you get a couple of his games and listen. You say, he was pretty good, Frank Messer. And of course, one of the classiest guys who always came across that way was Bill White. And of course, White was a very good player for the Cardinals in those 60s teams. I also think he played for the Phillies. But Bill White was he had a different voice from the other 3. It generated, it was the way that he sent was always common. It was a confident tone. If you can understand, it was a real confident tone. Now, he didn't have the litany of stories that Rizzuto had, but he was more like a real meat and potatoes. He would give you more of the strategy behind the game, but he also was definitely, and of course, if you hated the Yankees, you hated to listen to White because he did root for the Yankees, but he was not above really saying a great play being made by the opposing team. I can remember him screaming out the name Yastrzemski on a home run that he hit and saying, wow, he just loves great players. He just loves great performances. He loves the drama. So that was Bill White. And then later on, I tell you, he would have made a wonderful baseball commissioner because he saw both sides. Maybe he didn't own a team, but being on the side or being under the contract with the Yankees, he probably saw the business side of the game. And of course, being a player, he saw it from the player side. And then also, I think he showed that he was a real fan. I think he would have always thought about the fans first. The Mets had 3 great announcers. I know my father always thought that Ralph Kiner was secretly a Pirates fan, and he would always joke. I know he was only joking, but he always thought that Kiner was a Pirate fan and rooted for the Pirates when they would come into Shea. And but Kiner, I have to tell you, of the 6 guys, Kiner probably had the richest baseball knowledge. He really had, he always talked about his relationship with Hank Greenberg. He always talked about Branch Rickey. He always talked about, he knew so much baseball history. And of course, you had Lindsey Nelson, the consummate broadcaster. I remember I always liked Lindsey, probably because he also used to broadcast the Notre Dame football games, and he always did the Cotton Bowl. And growing up as a kid, the first 2 bowl games that Notre Dame returned to was the 70 and 71 Cotton Bowls. Lindsey was doing those for Channel 2. And I always felt that he was rooting for the Irish, so I always liked him because he did do the Irish replays that you would see on Channel 11 at midnight. My dad used to let me stay up for those as a kid, and you'd watch the Notre Dame replays of the game during the day. Those are great memories. And then finally, you have Bob Murphy, another consummate broadcaster. He was always funny. I always thought they had a very good relationship, all 6 broadcasters with each other. Probably, I enjoyed White and Rizzuto together. I always thought they had quite, I think White sat there every once in a while when Rizzuto was saying something, and he was just caught by surprise about what Rizzuto would say because they were both players, obviously. And I always thought that he got a kick out of the Scooter. I think Messer was more like, all right, I got to keep the game here focused because I can't let Rizzuto go too far off talking about all these special relationships with fans and all the rest of it. And I think on the Mets side, I always thought that Murphy and Kiner had a real nice relationship. Not that Lindsay didn't with Ralph, but I always thought that they played off each other, Murphy and Kiner, really well. And there were times in those games that Kiner would always weave baseball stories into the game. Now, maybe he wasn't the classic broadcaster, but even he, in many respects, doing the game, what they would do, both stations or both teams, two would be in the booth for television, and then one would be by themselves on the radio. And but Kiner, since he didn't have to, let's say, theoretically do the play-by-play when he was in the television booth, man, he had some great stories. And I will tell you, there was no better show than Kiner's Corner, and that I'll save for another day. This is Will O'Toole for Park Ridge Sports History. Thank you again, and I'll see you next week.